You know, every time you flip a light switch, you're tapping into one of the most complex systems on the entire planet. But have you ever stopped to think about the rules that actually govern that flow of power? Well, today we're going to plug right into the one law that completely rewired India's entire electricity sector, the Electricity Act of 2003. And it's such a great question, right? Because the answer affects literally everything, from the light bulb in your room all the way to the massive industries that power the entire economy. And the rule book for all of it, well, it's this one single foundational act. All right, so let's jump right in. To really get a handle on the 2003 Act, you've got to understand this wasn't just some minor update. No way. It was a complete and total system reboot for India's entire power sector. So, before 2003, the laws for electricity were, well, they were a mess. A total patchwork of old regulations, some of them even dating back to the colonial era. They were outdated, clunky, and they just couldn't keep up with India's massive, growing energy needs. So this new act came in to consolidate everything, to create one modern, forward-looking framework. Now, what's so cool here is the actual language from the Act's own introduction, the preamble. Just look at those key words: competition, protect consumers, and supply of electricity to all areas. I mean, that signals a massive, massive shift in thinking. It's moving away from a totally state-controlled monopoly to a much more open market that's really designed to serve you, the end user. And this table really drives home the scale of that reboot we were talking about. The 2003 Act didn't just tweak the old laws. Nope. It completely threw them out and replaced three major pieces of legislation. It literally wiped the slate clean to build something totally new from the ground up. Okay, so we've established it was a massive change. But how did this new law affect the very beginning of the electricity journey? I'm talking about the generation of power itself. Well, one of the biggest goals here was to tackle India's constant power shortages. The old system was just full of hurdles that made it super difficult for new power plants to get built. The 2003 Act aimed to change all that by basically slashing through the red tape and rolling out the welcome mat for private investment. And you know what? It worked. This one change unleashed a huge wave of new private power plants all across the country, completely changing the energy game. So how did it do it? In two really smart ways. First, and this is under Section 7 of the Act, it de-licensed generation. Now, this was a huge deal. It meant a company could actually build and run a power plant without needing to get a government license first. And second, it officially recognized and encouraged something called captive generation. So, what on earth is a captive plant? It's pretty simple, actually. Think of a massive steel mill or a sprawling tech park. For them, a reliable 24/7 power supply is absolutely critical. So, thanks to this act, they can now build their own power plant right on site. It's a win-win. They get the power they need, and it takes some of the pressure off the main grid. All right, so the power has been generated. Now what? Well, it needs to travel, sometimes hundreds and hundreds of miles. And that brings us to the national grid. Think of it as the superhighway for all those electrons. And hey, this definition you see here, it comes straight from the Act itself. The grid is that massive, interconnected web of high-voltage lines and substations that moves huge amounts of power from a generation plant, say in one part of the country, to a city in a completely different part. It's truly the backbone of the whole system. Now, managing this flow, wow, it's an incredibly complex balancing act. I mean, you have to match supply and demand perfectly, second by second, across the entire country. A tiny mismatch, and the whole grid could collapse into a blackout. So who's in the control tower making sure that doesn't happen? Well, the Act set up a really clear three-level command structure. Think of it like a pyramid. At the very top, you have the National Load Despatch Centre, which sees the big picture for the whole country. Underneath them are regional centers that manage huge chunks of the country, and at the base, state centers handle the power flow inside their own borders. They are literally the air traffic controllers for the electricity grid, keeping everything running smoothly and safely. Okay, so we've generated the power, we've sent it across the country on the superhighway. Now for that final crucial step, the last mile. This is all about distribution, bringing that electricity right into our homes and businesses. And this brings us to what is maybe one of the most revolutionary ideas in the entire 2003 Act: open access. The concept is pretty simple but powerful. It's the idea that the power lines, that distribution network,
should work like a public highway. Anyone should be able to use them to move electricity, not just the local power company.
So does that mean you or I can just switch our power company like we switch our phone provider? I mean, that was the ultimate vision, right? To create a real competitive market where you could shop around for the best deal. But has it actually worked out that way in practice? Well, the reality is a little more complicated. The truth is, for now, open access really benefits the big players. We're talking large industrial or commercial users. Section 42 of the Act basically says that if a factory needs more than 1 megawatt of power, they can skip the local utility and buy their electricity directly from a generator, often for a much cheaper price. But, and this is important, they still have to pay a surcharge to the local company. And that makes sense, right? Because that local company still has to maintain all the poles and wires for the rest of us. All right, so this all brings us to the question that probably matters most to every single one of us: the bill. After all these big changes, who actually gets to decide the price we pay for electricity? This is another huge shift. The Act took the power of setting prices away from the government and handed it over to independent regulatory bodies called electricity commissions. You've got a central one for national issues and then a state commission in each state. Their whole job is to be an impartial referee, setting the tariffs, which is just a fancy word for the prices we all pay. And they don't just pull these numbers out of thin air. Section 61 of the Act gives them a very specific and pretty complex set of instructions. They have to perform this incredible balancing act. On one hand, they have to keep prices fair for you, the consumer. But on the other, they have to make sure power companies can recover their costs so they don't go out of business. And, on top of all that, they're supposed to encourage efficiency, promote renewables like solar and wind, and try to slowly fix complicated subsidy systems. It's a massive, massive job. So, when you step back and look at it, the Electricity Act of 2003 was absolutely a landmark law. It laid out the entire blueprint for India's modern power sector. It brought in competition, it tried to empower consumers, and it set up independent watchdogs. The framework it built is a huge reason for the incredible growth we've seen in energy, both regular and renewable. But the journey to fully achieve all of its ambitious goals, well, that story is still being written today.